and this is my Rome. Welcome back to Rome, Your Eminence, and welcome to our show. I feel quite safe in saying that EWTN viewers all around the world know that today I am speaking to Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz, the Archbishop of Krakow, Poland, but who for 40 long and beautiful years was the private secretary of the late Pope John Paul II. Known as Don Stanislaw, Father Stanislaw, for 40 years you were much more than a secretary. You were a cherished and a valued friend, day in and day out, year in and year out.
Certainly, for me, it is something very important in order not to lose memory of a great man, a great priest, and a great pope. This is not only my desire as his secretary for so many years, but the people. The people don't want to forget him either. For example, in Rome, so many people go every day to his tomb, and also in Krakow, to discover and know the culture, faith, and the milieu in which he grew up. We also want to remember the person and the entire legacy he has left us. A truly great legacy. And this is not just for us. We know it. We have it. But we must share this, all that we lived. This is for those who come after us. Certainly, so many people agree with me that he, John Paul, was an exceptional man, that he changed the world. The world he found when he became Pope is different from the one he left, and the Church as well. We can certainly say that he brought the world closer to the Church, and the Church closer to the world. His document, Fides et Ratio, brought science and faith closer together. This very important relationship still bears fruit today. The worlds of culture and science better understand the Church, and the Church is more open to these worlds.
Now, I know you want to perpetuate John Paul's life, his legacy, his papacy, and I know you're making plans for a permanent memorial in Krakow. I'd like very much to hear about that.
It will be a great center to honor the memory of a person, a multimedia center, where people can see and hear this man and learn about him and all that he did through images, words, and documents. It will also be a volunteer center for young people, a study center, a center for all that he saw and did, the defense of life, from the first days to the end. You will be able to see all the works that he did and the works that he began and urged others to continue.
Eminence, did you see changes in Karol Wojtyła as a priest when he was Archbishop and even when he was Pope?
For us, he was an example of a great spiritual life. And at the same time, as a man, he had a very mature humanity. I remember a very old priest who told me that when some men became bishops, they felt they had to change something. But Wojtyła did not have to change. The same was true when he became Pope.
What changes did you see in yourself as a priest in those 40 years that you spent with John Paul as an archbishop and later as the Pope? And how did you change as a person?
Yes, I changed just by being so close to such a great man. Becoming closer to his life was possible. To imitate him in everything was impossible, but to try to do so was possible. His life became my life, even from a spiritual point of view. We heard each other's confessions. We prayed together. We celebrated Mass together. I learned a great deal from watching him, how he treated people, how he treated things. We learned so very much from him.
A question that's perhaps a little unusual. During his long pontificate, what would you say was the greatest frustration experienced by John Paul II?
Perhaps frustration is not the right word, because he saw everything through the eyes of faith. He dealt with everything through prayer, through contact with God. He was a man of God. Someone once asked me, how many hours did John Paul pray? His entire life was a prayer. Even when there were difficult or painful things, he tried to face them with faith, through contact with God. And there were painful things. But he always saw himself as servant of the Lord, saying, all that I do to serve the Lord. I don't think of whether I like it or not, of whether people like it or not. The Lord called me, and I want to fulfill all that I need to do. As I said, there were painful things. For example, now I am thinking of when Archbishop Lefebvre broke away from the Church. Certainly, that was painful. And when wars broke out, he felt pain for the people who suffered. And this way you can understand why he always preached peace. You never solve problems with war or force, but rather with dialogue and mutual understanding.
And maybe to yourself, Your Eminence, what was your greatest frustration as his secretary, as his aide, as his good friend?
Frustrations? Perhaps not. Painful situations? Yes. Next to him, we would experience pain when he did, not frustrations. Pain, not frustrations.
Cardinal Dziwisz, in your book, you highlight John Paul's words to the world the day his pontificate was inaugurated, October 22nd, 1978. Those words were, "Be not afraid, open your doors to Christ." You said this was the motto of his life and his pontificate, and it defined his spirit, his thoughts, his programs. Was there actually anything that he feared, that he was afraid of, or something that deeply concerned him about the state of the Church or society?
Certainly, these words were the program for his life, his entire pontificate. With these words, he opened the doors for people, especially when they were fighting communism. because all dictatorial regimes rule through fear. John Paul, with these words, especially with his very open and free manner, freed people from fear. He preached, "Be not afraid. Open the doors to Christ, because Christ will free us." He truly was not afraid. He was not afraid of an external enemy. He was not afraid of daily life. For example, after the attempt on his life in St. Peter's Square, everyone was afraid of his going out again into the square. But he said, "No, no, next week I am going into the square for the audience." He wasn't afraid. Everyone else was, but he was not. And even during the trips, there was always some kind of danger before the papal trips. For example, the trip to Bosnia-Herzegovina. When he did not go the first time, it was only to protect the people from danger, from difficulty. But he himself was not afraid. This had nothing to do with human strength. He had faith in the Lord.
Throughout your book on Pope John Paul, you stress two things in particular about the Pope. The first is that he was always and foremost a man of prayer, a man of God. The second was his great humanity. What for you was the most human side of this Pope, of this humanity? And is that humanity a part of his legacy?
Certainly, his respect for the human person. For example, during the general audiences, when he passed by, he looked at each person, young and old. If someone requested a prayer, he remembered. If he forgot later when he was older, he would say to us, "Write this down." When someone wrote him a letter asking for something, he might put it to one side, but he always returned to it and answered with great respect for the person. I never saw him raise his voice at anyone. Never. I only recall 2 times when he raised his voice. One was when he went to Agrigento, Sicily, and spoke against the mafia. And the other time was before the war in Iraq, when he said, "Dear sirs, I lived through war. Don't do this." And we can see today that he was right. So many victims, so many years, and almost nothing has been resolved.
Your Eminence, kind of a different question right now. I'd love to talk about how you reacted when you would hear of the extraordinary healings that were attributed to Pope John Paul. I mean, during his life, while he was alive. One story that comes to mind is the young boy, blind, who came to Mass in John Paul's chapel one day, met the Pope, of course, as was customary after Mass. He left the Apostolic Palace, and he could see. Your reaction to these stories?
I remember that boy. I remember. He had a serious eye problem, and afterwards, not during the encounter with the Pope, but afterwards, he got back his sight. I remember well. There were many such instances where the Pope never wanted to speak of this. I remember someone asking the Pope, "Holy Father, do you know that people have been healed because of you?" And he answered, "Man doesn't perform miracles. Miracles are done by God." And he never wanted to speak of this. But today, I can affirm that a number of things have happened. I remember one evening a young man called, a husband, very sad. He was desperate. He told me his wife had cancer, and the next day she had to go to the hospital for an operation. He asked for the blessing and prayers of the Holy Father. I informed the Holy Father. A day later, the husband called and told me his wife had gone to the hospital, but they found nothing. Yes. Yes, many stories like that. It is difficult to describe all these things. I do, however, remember an Englishwoman who came to a general audience, a journalist, I believe. She wanted only one thing, the Pope's blessing, because she knew she was about to die. But she recovered. The Pope always said, "Let's pray together. Let's pray together." I also remember Monsignor Munduzzi, whom you surely knew. At one audience, he pointed and said to me, "Look at this man. Several weeks ago, he came with crutches. Today, he came without them to thank the Holy Father."
How amazing.
But that's not new. When you read the Acts of the Apostles, just the mere shadow of Peter was enough to heal. And this is repeated throughout history.
You also wrote in your book that the cross accompanied John Paul right from his earliest years. You spoke of the loss of his mother, his brother, and finally, his beloved father. You spoke of the years of communism and Nazism, the attack on his life in St. Peter's Square in May 1981, the operations he endured in his long pontificate, his long final illness, which of course was a lesson in dying with dignity, a lesson the entire world could watch. You said, in the teaching of the Holy Father, man is the first and principal path of the Church, but the suffering man is the privileged path. John Paul, you wrote, was the Pope of the sick and the suffering. Your Eminence, I'd love to know, did John Paul ever help you carry a cross? And how do you weave these lessons of illness and suffering into your ministry as Archbishop?
One time that I recall, he helped me with an almost physical assistance. I had had a big accident. Yes, and for me it was a very difficult and very painful situation. At a certain point, I had to make a visit to the hospital, and I asked the Holy Father to bless me, and he blessed me. But I was hurting so much, and things were broken. So I also took with me the image of Divine Mercy with Sister Faustina. From that moment, I began to heal. Today, when I have some problems, I say, "Holy Father, help me." And very discreetly, I say to myself, "Holy Father, I helped you for so many years. Please help me now." And he helps me. And I tell people, when you have a problem, ask him, and he will ask the Lord.
And now I'd really like to know something a little different. Is there any one fact, this could be a person or a quality or an event, any one fact about Pope John Paul that you knew, that you know about, and that nobody else knows, that you'd like to perhaps tell us about today?
Perhaps something that happened in Toronto during the 2002 Encounter for World Youth Day. There was a huge storm, rain, wind, thunder. And we were supposed to start the Mass for the young people at the end of this World Day. There was such a huge crowd. People were all wet. some were scared.
Moltissima gente, moltissimi giovani.
They had announced that the young people had to move. They had to get away from electrical outlets, currents, because it was dangerous. One of the organizers came and said, "It will be even worse in an hour." I was a witness to this, and not the only one. Someone told the Holy Father, "Holy Father, what we need now is the Lord's intervention." And I must tell you, he raised his hand, he made the sign of the cross, and things began to calm down. The sun came out, and we could, in all tranquility, celebrate Mass. Well, that same man came to me afterwards and said, "I don't understand a thing." But we understood perfectly well what had happened.
Your Eminence, Pope Benedict, then, of course, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, and Pope John Paul II, they got along so famously. Joseph Ratzinger was the Pope's collaborator, closest friend for 20 years, more than 20 years. How would you say that these two men, who are so different in personality and in style, how did they get along so well?
I can say, first of all, there was a great friendship. Immediately after John Paul became Pope, he needed to have at his side a man of great theological preparation to help face the problems. Remember, there were contestations even within the Church. He felt that the man who could most help him as a great theologian was Ratzinger, and he asked him to come. He always had great faith in and esteem for Cardinal Ratzinger. I think the saints have something like this spiritual closeness. I often talk of these things, and I think that certainly John Paul II not only esteemed Ratzinger, there was this great closeness, great trust in Ratzinger. I can't speak, of course, for the Holy Father, Pope Benedict. You would have to ask him, but I am sure he felt the same way towards John Paul. And even now, he often says, "our Pope," recalling John Paul II. This is very simpatico. There is a certain something, I can't find the right word. They were more than collaborators. It is something that is much deeper, a spiritual unity. Both were men of great faith, but also of great love towards Christ.
How very long we could talk about Pope John Paul, a man who was such a giant part of our lives, of the lives of untold millions of people of every faith, of the lives of generations of seminarians and priests today. Your Eminence, you told me that the radiance of John Paul's personality and his holiness did not finish on the day of his death, but that they've become ever more intense on his departure to eternity. And I'd like to close with your thoughts about the continuing legacy of John Paul's personality and his spirituality.
We could say he was a perfect man. From a human and also spiritual aspect, he kept developing spiritually and intellectually.
Adatto a sviluppo spirituale e intellettuale.
And certainly, in death,
la morte si può
people
dire che la
said,
gente chiama
"Blessed
beata morte,
death."
che proprio era nuova evangelizzazione.
And this is a kind of new evangelization.
Ho incontrato
I
tanti
have met
giovani,
so
non
very many young
solamente,
people,
che sono
and
venuti
not just
ai
young people,
funerali
who came to his
e
funeral,
dopo hanno cambiato la
and
vita.
they told me their life had changed
Cioè,
afterwards.
dopo la
Like
morte,
so many saints,
lui come
after
tanti
his death,
santi, tutti
he acted,
agisce
he had influence.
e ha influsso. Questa
This book of an
sia
earthly
più
life
una
closed,
vita in
but
questa
a new
terra,
chapter
ma
opened,
si è aperto nuovo
a
capitolo
commitment to the new
che
evangelization.
ci ha dato
And
impegno,
we
nuova
now are writing the
evangelizzazione,
second chapter,
e anche
trying
noi
to realize
adesso
the legacy he
scriviamo
left us
secondo
in his
capitolo,
testament.
realizzando tutto quello che ci ha lasciato il suo testamento.
Now, we've been looking at the past at John Paul's pontificate. At his April 8th, 2005 funeral, thousands of people shouted, "Santo subito," make him a saint immediately. Pope Benedict abbreviated the time for the cause for canonization, eliminating the usual 5-year waiting period to open a cause. Now let's look at the present, because in December, Pope Benedict declared John Paul II venerable, bringing him a step closer to beatification. So we now await the confirmation of a miracle and a date to be set for the beatification. On February 19th, Pope Benedict holds a consistory for several causes of canonization. Can you give us any further information about the process?
I don't talk about these things because I have great faith in the Holy Father Benedict XVI. He will know what to do and how. Certainly, the process, the cause is moving forward. This decree of heroic virtues is important for the process. It is fundamental for the cause of beatification, of canonization. There is no dispensation from this decree. The Holy Father is declaring he is a saint when he declares the heroic virtues. So he is saying, this is a saintly man. And now we await confirmation of a sign from God, that is, a miracle. Certainly, people will wait for this, even if they are already convinced he is a saint.
On behalf of EWTN and all of our viewers throughout the world, sincere and heartfelt thanks for your time today.